Welcome back to the Training Model YouTube channel. This is a new setup for me. I'm trying a new desk setup, got a proper camera and a good mic because I plan on doing some like mini lectures and things. So firstly, thank you to everybody that has subbed so far, that has also commented on the first video. It was a little bit detailed. I wasn't sure exactly how it was going to run, but I'm glad that people seem to get a bit out of it. So today what we're actually going to go through is... hang on, as I said, I'm new to all this. Today what we're going to go through is a model. What is a model? Some examples of models and why I think it's really important to have a principle-driven approach to consuming information in health and fitness, or in anything really, but obviously we're coaches and therapists and we help people. I'm not a therapist, but you might be a therapist. And we help people and we coach people and we get them to better understand health and fitness and pursuit of all that sort of stuff. And I think principle-driven strategies make way more sense, especially once we understand what a model is. So what is a model? You may have heard of this term model before. My whole business is called Training Model. It's my training model, I wanted to call it coaching model, but that was already taken. Someone like I wrote a book apparently. So I couldn't use that, but I went with Training Model. So what is a model? Well, ultimately, a model helps us make decisions. That's all it is. And the reason that it helps us make decisions is because we don't have all of the required information. We will never have all the required information to make the most informed decision. And it's a fool's end. It's a stupid process in trying to just continually gather more and more information in order to make your decisions within coaching. And the reason that is because most information that we end up gathering doesn't actually matter for the outcome. We're wasting our time just gathering more and more and more information. This is part of the reason why I don't really like too much objectivity in training. And we'll get into load and what all that stuff means and the subjective experience and the psychosomatic response to training that actually occurs. But that will be another video. But gathering more and more information is just a wasted pursuit in many contexts and many situations. And what we actually need to do is just have a better framework, a better model to make decisions quickly and accurately with the limited information that we have. So this is why we build models. This is why people utilize and develop models, because it helps them make decisions with the limited information that they do have. So humans are endlessly complex. Our life, our situation, the objective and the subjective world is endlessly complex. We'll never have all the information. And as a result of that, we will never have all the context to make the most informed decisions. So models provide us a framework for us to quickly gather the required information that actually makes a difference to the goal outcome, what we're actually trying to pursue. Generally, our models will be underpinned by what I like to call hard science. So these principles that are held within hard science, things like mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology. I'd put psychology in there. Psychology isn't as hard, or our understanding of it isn't as hard as some of those other things, but I'd put psychology in there, and that subjective world matters a lot as well. So generally we'll have some core principles that build out our model, or our development of our model, that are held within hard science and within truth. And ultimately, those foundational principles allow us to be confident in our decision-making process, even though we have limited information. And then finally, models improve our accuracy and our speed of decision-making and the effectiveness of the interventions, leading to more productive, positive outcomes. And ultimately, this is why it's important to understand models. Because if you understand the model, you understand the key principles. And if you understand the key principles, we can make informed, quick decisions that actually lead to better outcomes for our clients. So here are some examples of models within health and fitness. The first one here is called a constraints-based model. This is something that has been influential in my understanding of outcome-driven coaching. Constraints-based model was actually developed for movement outcomes as an expression of task and environment, and the inputs that change the way in which a human presents with a skill expression or movement expression. So that's one key model. This evidence-based sort of hierarchy is a model. And again, we don't have all the information, but when we read a paper and it says peer-reviewed systemic analysis or systematic analysis, systemic analysis. We know that that is the top one, and that information is going to be held with higher truth than an anecdote. And when we gather anecdotal evidence, we know that it's not as strong. It's still important, it's still evidence, but it's not as strong as full-blown reviews and processes that undertake with peer-reviewed processes. That's conjecture as well, and there's a bit of give and take there, but for the most part, that is a model. Gravity is a model. Our understanding of gravity is a model. It started with Newtonian physics, and the whole idea of the apple falling from the tree and things are moving towards the larger object. And eventually, Einstein came along and updated our understanding, our model of gravity, to include things like general and special relativity and this whole idea of space and time and the continuum of the fourth dimension. That is another model. It is simply just a more updated idea of gravity and what gravity is. However, we still don't have all the information. We don't know what gravity is, but we know it well enough that we can make informed, accurate decisions and do things like send rockets out to space, which is really cool. Gait and everything relates to gait. The gait cycle as a model of human movement is another model. It allows us, or it allows me, and we'll get into gait cycle eventually, but it allows me to very quickly understand where center of mass is relative to base of support and what relative motions through the skeleton I'm going to see as a response to being either behind, on top, or in front of the base of support. Bill Hartman, a couple years ago, he's the king, and I think he has the best understanding of whatever we all do as coaches, but he has developed his own model, and in the process of doing that, confused a lot of people, especially a few years ago with all this compression and expansion talk. But at the end of the day, he's boiling all of his ideas and all the relative context and information that he has to better understand what he's doing with his practice and coaching practice and rehabilitation practice. So Bill Hartman has created his own model. Biopsychosocial model is a model way of thinking about all the relative influences that change and alter the human in front of us perspective, both objective and subjective reality. We have gas theory and adaptation theory. That is a model. We have this top-down, bottoms-up framework for coaching strategy, or at least that's how I like to think about it, but rigid rules and structures versus more reactive, in the moment programming strategies. So top down and bottoms up is another model. This load model from Franco Impalazzeri is another thing that we will eventually unpack, but this is another version of a model, and it allows us to very quickly understand exactly what good load management actually looks like and plays like. So these are just examples of a few different models, but we're starting to see how there's really broad sweeping ideas, but all of these models are actually influential in the way in which we make decisions, and we don't have all the information within each of these particular models. However, it helps us make a more informed, practical decision long term. So if you've gone through my Coaching Foundations course, this is actually my overall coaching model, and it's adapted from 3 key models that underpin my thinking and my decision making. Within the middle, we have top down and bottoms up, and that's represented by these 2 arrows and these 2 triangles. And ultimately, we need a combination of both, and it's going to be relatively individual, the expression of both top down and bottoms up coaching practices. And ultimately, as a response to that, we are going to start to feed outcomes into the system. We're going to start to see and present with positive and negative adaptations, subjective and objective sort of performance markers starting to change as a response to the system that's being input. We then have 3 key areas of inputs into the system. From a top-down perspective of inputs, we have the goals and the constraints within the system, the hard things that actually influence our decision making. So setting a goal and a time frame constrains the available option from a coaching perspective that we have. And it's beneficial to have goals and specific things that we're working towards with clients, and I'd recommend setting things up for clients and building that in, because those top-down constraints actually help us with motivation. Setting an end date helps us with our attitude in the process, knowing that there is an end date. It gives us an opportunity to review and actually have an objective review of what just happened in the process. So all of those top-down constraints of set goals and times and task Task constraints are really important. From the bottoms up feeders, we have the individual, and this is represented by this little circle, this alternating circle, which is adapted from a paper called An Active Approach to Pain, if you wanted to look that up. But this alternating circle is actually the internal subjective world and the external objective world that the human is living in, or at least that's how I like to view it. And it's the foundation of that understanding is it's the BPS model. However, it's just an updated understanding of that for a coaching application. And that is that we have this give and take of subjective and objective reality that is influencing the state in which the person is progressing, or not progressing, sorry. So we need to really understand the subjective world and the objective world that that human is living in. And we're part of that. And our coaching relationship and the environment that we create is the second part of that bottoms up feeder within the system. The environment that the human is placed in is significantly and quickly going to change the outcomes that we see, because it has such a huge impact on the psychological sort of state that the human is in. And your relationship as a coach or as a therapist is feeding that environment constantly. And how you respond and your attitude and the development of the self-efficacy of the human in front of you is all changing in real time, those bottoms up feeders of the individual in front of you. So we have top down, bottoms up, and all of these constraints and stuff feeding into the system. And eventually we start to drive outcomes as a response to that. And in order to change the outcomes, we have to change these inputs. And that is an adaptation, an adaptation of this kind of idea within the constraints-based model. So that is my overall coaching model. However, what I wanted to chat about today is movement models, because this is, I think, completely misunderstood within our industry. And I think if you understand where people have their ideas from and have gained and developed their models and their principles of human movement, we can way better understand what the fuck people are talking about on social media and how to get actually good outcomes with coaches. So when I view movement models, I think there's two main streams of movement models, and everybody will fall within one of these categories. Whether or not you're reading and learning from a hypertrophy-based coach, whether or not you're learning and reading from a rehabilitation-based coach, whether or not you're learning and reading from somebody like me, somebody like a David Gray, somebody like a Bill Hartman, somebody like a Cass, somebody like whoever else, like all of these people that have developed their own models and ways of thinking, even you could go into like a Brett Contreras and all of that. They all have, everybody sits on one side of this fence as their primary model understanding. First model is muscle first, a muscle first lens. And this, I think, stems mostly from the traditional bodybuilding lens. And that is that muscles pull on bones. And that is all that muscles really do. And as a response to muscles pulling on bones, we actually have a bunch of just levers within the system. So our elbow is a type of lever. And when the bicep pulls on the arm, it actually creates that motion. And that's completely fair. And there's pros and cons to viewing human movement in this way. The opposite side to that is a skeleton first lens. And this, I think, comes from a more global view of human movement rather than just focusing on tension and force production and the outcomes of training. We're actually focusing on more of the human and the development of the human. This is where I sit. I sit way more in this side than this side over here. I think they both have pros and cons, and we'll go through some of that. I'm over here, and I recommend most people start over here. And I think the core pillar of skeleton first model is that muscles are reactive to your bone position and orientation. And that reaction to the system is what is creating tension and a responsive tension within the muscular system. It's the central nervous system trying to maintain equilibrium. This is kind of the tensegrity modeling understanding. If you've ever gone and viewed what like tensegrity based systems are, I think this is more of what we're discussing here. The system is somewhat balanced through this reactive tension. Gravity is the initial force that we learn to deal with and that we're constantly learning to manage. And all of that muscular tension that we're feeling and perceiving is a response to the global forces of pressure within the system, compression on the system from gravity, expansion as we move into different directions, management of center of mass, and all of that. And all of those changes of more global systemic pressures and systemic tension is actually a response to gravity, and it's a response of the muscular system pulling and holding the skeleton in space. And that's why I like to view it as a skeleton first versus a muscular first lens. So let's take a quick look at these two models with the example of a squat. First off, the muscular base, the muscle first lens for squats. This would look something like just discussing which muscles are under tension, which muscles lengthen, which muscles shorten, and all of that sort of stuff. So for the knee, we know that as we drop down, we're undergoing knee flexion. So the quad is probably under an eccentric stress and an eccentric tension. And at some point, that eccentric tension will need to be reversed into a concentric action, which begins the extension of the knee, which begins us driving up. And we can shift and manage tension within the system by manipulating moment arms and force vectors and all of that sort of stuff based on different muscles. If we wanted it to be more hip dominant, maybe we shift to a back squat and keep the shin vertical and load into the hips more or something like that. Ultimately, we're just changing the levers and changing the forces on the different muscles to manage and shift tension around. That would be a muscular first lens of a squat mechanic. A skeleton first lens would be more so that we're actually just overcoming and balancing gravity in this exercise. That's all we're doing. We've got a small base of support, which means we have and we've got an elevated center of mass, which probably means we have some sort of balance demand that is pretty challenging for the system to overcome. As a response of that balance demand, here we're using a front squat. We know that the weight is going to shift us backwards in space. It's going to shift our center of mass backwards in space because we've got an anterior load. As a response to that, we're going to have a whole bunch of different muscles that have to begin to start to create tension to hold our shape and to hold our balance. Those particular muscles, if we wanted to look into them, would be the flexor-based group. The abs, the hamstrings, the serratus, the pec major. They're probably going to be the main ones that we're thinking about. But that flexor group is having to hold some tension in it to maintain balance of the system because of the anterior load. As a response to that, we're actually going to see a very particular pattern start to present where the knees are going to come forward in order to keep us upright, and all of a sudden we're looking like a deep quad dominant stretch. However, the response of the muscles was all because of the gravity demand of the actual exercise itself, a front-loaded squat position here in this example. So we can view the squat as just a squat. We can use a muscular lens, a traditional hypertrophy-based, tension-based model of muscles and joints and levers, which is great for certain applications. Or we can use this gravity skeleton first. Muscle is reactive to the tasks and the constraints of the movement and what we've done and how we've set things up and the cueing as two different advantages for the same thing. So my bias is definitely going to be like this skeleton first model, especially when I think about like coaching progression and all of that sort of thing. Like if you don't understand this, this muscle first model very quickly creates problems. I think the main problem is that eventually we get to a point where we're trying to target a very particular muscle length, a very particular tissue or anything like that. And we start to put a microscope on very particular things causing positive and negative outcomes. And that would be, an example of that would be like boiling down back pain to the disc bulge or something like that, or boiling down back pain to QL tightness, where in reality that's probably, and I mean all of our understanding of like pain science and rehabilitation science and all of this is like, it's very hard to pinpoint exactly why people are presenting the way they are. If we take a more skeleton, a more global, a more zoomed out view of what's happening, somebody presenting with back pain could be a whole multitude of factors of how the system is managing itself under load, or the amount of load that's being placed through it, and load management, both internal and external load management. It could be a little bit more of like global movement patterns and motor control based things. It could be a little bit, it could be a whole bunch of like technical sort of things that are causing the back pain to be presented, rather than going super focused on one particular tissue or one particular muscle. And that is just one example. We'll get into more and more as we begin to unpack these sort of things. So what are the pros of having both lenses? Well, muscle first, I think, has its best application for tension and understanding length-tension relationship, and how to actively create greater amounts of tension within different movements and different muscles. So I think for the hypertrophy lens, a muscular first lens is huge. Also machine-based training, understanding how to set up machines and maximize tension in both lengthened and shortened positions is huge. Skeleton first models, I think, make the most sense everywhere else. And that is just when we're starting to think of just human function, mobility, and strength expression. In general, I think skeleton first models make the most sense. And that is because we have to understand how the entire system is dealing with the task constraints and the gravity constraints, rather than just being hyper focused on one particular muscle that's creating force or creating tension. Because it is a systemic response to the management of gravity, more so than it is anything else, especially when we're doing standing performance-based outcome-driven things. Things like squatting, hinging, split squats, and all of those sort of standing positions. And then if you go into like athletic realms, things like jumping, plyometrics, med ball throws, and then if you go even further to skill expression, things like a golf swing, things like sprinting and jumping and all of that, all of those things, and the further down that performance spectrum you get, all of those things are actually just utilizing our system's mass with gravity, and utilizing gravity as the counter force for us to do performance-based things. So if we don't have a good understanding of firstly how the system deals with gravity and stands up and manages gravity just in standing unloaded positions, but then also how we progress that to exploring strength development and power development and speed development in the gym, and then going a step further, and mobility expression within the gym, and then a step further in how do we transition that into skill and sport specific or life specific outcomes. All of that is a progression of gravity management, which is a skeleton first lens. So outside of hypertrophy and tension for hypertrophy outcomes, I will almost always go back to the skeleton global perspective. How are we managing gravity? How are we dealing with pressure and internal forces as the main model for myself? And that is what I educate on and around. So as always, this is just the second video. I'm going to do more of these little mini lectures and all of this sort of stuff. Obviously, I have my movement mentorship coming up. If you're interested in learning from me, these are all concepts and things that we are going to dive deep into. You can use code YouTube to save 15% on all of my courses and mentorships. If you want to learn more about my movement, so my overall coaching model, I'd highly recommend the short course training model, which is on the website as well. Again, YouTube will save 15%. If you have any questions, drop them down below. Love to chat. Shoot me a message on DM. Next week, I think we're going to do some respiration-based things and start unpacking more of this skeleton first understanding.